We spent last week looking at how Congress operates, and we'll be continuing this week with our study of the national legislature. I'd like to begin by summarizing some of the key points that we discussed last week, but then I want to move on to focus on some more interesting and worthwhile points that Lee Hamilton discusses in the book of his that we've been reading. And I'd like to conclude the PowerPoint clips later this week with some of my own thoughts on congressional politics. And I hope all of these remarks together help tie up what you've been reading and thinking about with regard to this particular branch of our government. Last time I went to some length to talk about the critical elements of how Congress operates. I made the point, if you recall, that Congress uses a division of labor practice, such that most of the work is really parceled out to committees with individuals who have some particular expertise in the policy area at issue with a particular piece of legislation. I said that congressional staff are terribly important in the functioning of that body. These folks not only help facilitate the work and schedules of individual congressmen, but they also run committees as well. And I discussed how the party with the majority of votes in the House or Senate gets to control the body. And what I mean by that is that that party gets to determine who the leaders of the chamber will be. They get to pick who controls the committee appointments. They set the agenda for the chamber. They get to determine which bills are considered by the full chamber and which ones are not. And if the majority party does this without at least nominal consent by the minority party, it tends to be very difficult to get much done in that chamber. I talked at length about the Senate and how its rules and traditions seem to make it a more collegial body with compromise-oriented behavior. That's in part because of the representation scheme, which you recall gives small states the same basic clout as the large states, but also because the minority party can use the threat of a filibuster to oblige the majority party to negotiate over tricky matters. And also because of the more open amendment process. We talked about that. What this does is it can quickly turn a piece of legislation about one topic into legislation about a different topic, basically by substituting one amendment for the main thrust of the legislation in the original bill. And again, this is a way of forcing the majority party to take the consideration of the minority party members into consideration. We also talked about the range of activities that committees can undertake. Here's a list in this slide, but I won't go back over these. The House of Representatives has very different dynamics, and I talked about these some as well. It's a much larger and more unwieldy body with lots of different interests and very influential subgroups. Since the Republicans took back the House from the Democrats in 2010, it's been very difficult for John Boehner, the representative from Ohio, who's the Speaker of the House, just to control his own party members. And of course, he can't really exercise much control at all over members of the other party. So it's a very difficult task controlling the House of Representatives. And as I said, the House tends to be much less oriented toward compromise and more focused on getting bills passed, even if by a very small majority of the votes. Now, because of its size and unwieldiness, the House usually operates under much stricter rules than the Senate. It's far more difficult, as I said, to add amendments on the floor of the House. Most of the amending of pieces of legislation are done in committees before bills ever get to the floor. And because of the way the House operates, it's often true that big bills get passed with only the committee chairman and staff knowing very much about what's in them. And this happens in the Senate as well, but not nearly as often. At the beginning of this unit, I talked a little about Hamilton's perspective on Congress. And you remember there I said that he was particularly eager for Congress to keep the president and the executive branch from becoming too strong. Now, Hamilton also sees Congress as the primary entity for converting public opinion into policy. Now, if you think about this, it makes a lot of sense because really the executive branch, neither the executive branch nor the judicial branch of government are really as directly affected by the views of most voters as are House and Senate members. So for Hamilton, Congress plays a very important feedback role that the other branches of government do not. Now, one of Hamilton's more compelling chapters focused on the different kinds of roles that congressmen and women have to play. And he nicely explains how they don't just work in Washington, D.C. on bills, but in fact spend a significant amount of time and energy working back at home directly with their constituents. And as a result, a congressman or senator may end up looking into constituent concerns about problems back in their district or state, and maybe there's a problem with some harmful effect of a law or regulation, and the representatives and senators are asked to check that out and try to intervene on behalf of their members back at home. Now, I do like the notion that the House and Senate members are or should be educators of the public about important pieces of legislation or problems of one kind or another. This is, to my mind, where Congress has really fallen down in recent years. Politicians would really rather not keep constituents focused on the long-term effects of our spending and taxing policies, but would like to focus on other things that are less depressing. Hamilton ultimately discusses a dozen or so different kinds of roles that he says Congress people play. So in addition to being advocates for their district or state and educators of their constituents, they're also supposed to be students of the public policy concerns of most interest to them and their constituents. And they also have to represent the political system to local groups. And of course, they do have substantial fundraising duties to do. And they also work to support their local political party in their district. So finally, at least in theory, they should be helping build consensus when they're within their state or district on important matters of public policy.